Just so you know, the title of this video is clickbait. I read somewhere about YouTube suppressing negative reviews of Captain Mar-Vell or something like that. So I'm running a little experiment here. That's why the title is a question. Is it the best movie ever? No, it's not. That's the answer to that question. It is not the best movie ever. You're also going to see the main image is an image of Mar-Vell, the real Captain Mar-Vell from the comics. And that's because I don't even want to let the algorithm see an image of Carol, any copyrighted images that Disney's used in the marketing for this movie. And since they're trying so hard to erase Mar-Vell, I have a feeling that they're not even going to care about this one. But we'll see. Right off the bat, the movie it's meh. It's okay. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's not the worst movie that's going to come out this month. I don't know what is, but it's not going to be this one. The action and stuff is okay. Sometimes it's actually good. Brie Larson is not the worst or most annoying person to ever exist. Like, the movie has positives for it. And when I went into the movie, I didn't have very high expectations. And then when the movie started and it showed Carol on Krelar, or Hala, whatever they call it now, and they showed her interacting with Jude Law, and they showed her on that first mission with the Star Force. It's like I was actually kind of into it. And then the movie keeps going, and a lot of little annoyances start to pop up over and over and over again. And by the end of the movie, I was really, really annoyed with the movie. Part of the problem, though, is that I can't tell how much I would be annoyed by if I wasn't so familiar with the source material. Like, if I was just analyzing it as a standalone film, not knowing anything about the comics, how would I feel about it? And I think I wouldn't be as annoyed, but I still don't think I would be as impressed with it. So, I'm trying to figure out how much I want to put spoilers in and how much I don't want to put spoilers in. So, I'll just say that it's an okay movie. I mean, the positive, like the Rotten Tomatoes score, the critic score is like 79 or 80%, something like that. And a lot of the fresh reviews, a lot of the positive reviews on the critic side are pretty tepid. They give it like a 3.5 out of 5, that sort of thing. I would tend to agree with that rating, 5 or 6 out of 10. But that being said, there's a lot that's really obnoxious in the movie. It builds up okay. It's kind of an annoying middle part, and then the ending is just really bad. At least I thought. So there's my non-spoiler review of it right there. It's not the worst movie ever made, but it could have been a lot better. So here's the spoiler part. So I think my biggest annoyance with the movie is the way that it ends. For, I guess, years now, ever since they started talking about the Captain Mar-Vell film, even I think before they had Brie Larson cast, Kevin Feige and other people in the Marvel, studios hierarchy were talking about how Captain Mar-Vell, Carol Danvers, is the most powerful superhero in the MCU. And I was never sure how seriously to take that, because it could just be a marketing thing. They could just be saying this, or maybe they mean that her peak power level is higher than anybody else, but her average power level could be a lot lower than that, because in the comics she could do this thing where she goes binary, where she basically takes in a whole lot of energy, because that's the only part of her power set that's sort of interesting, is that she can absorb energy and then blast it out as well. Otherwise she's just a normal flying brick. But so she can absorb a crap ton of energy, become extremely powerful, but then she burns out pretty quickly and it's really bad for her. But in the movie, at the end, it turns out that the talk about her being the most powerful wasn't smoke. It wasn't a marketing ploy. They seem to have meant it very, very literally. And that's really stupid. Carol Danvers is not even in the top 10 most powerful Avengers in the comics. And even at her peak, and even in her binary form, I don't think she could beat Thor. I don't think she could beat the Hulk. I don't think she could beat Wonder Man or Vision or any of those ever really high-level Avengers. And in this movie, the way that it ends is she finally takes her powers, because it turns out that she gets her powers from the Cosmic Cube, just like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, but instead of having it gotten to her through human science, it was gotten to her through Kree science, so she gets it even more than Scarlet Witch did, which I have to rewatch Captain America, or at least the end of it, because my recollection is that S.H.I.E.L.D. got the Cosmic Cube, which they call the Tesseract. I'm going to call it the Cosmic Cube. But they got the Cosmic Cube when they recovered Captain America. That's my recollection. But I'll have to rewatch it to find out, because here in this movie it shows that they had it ever since at least the 80s. So she finally taps into her full power, and not only does she beat all the bad guys fairly easily, all the bad Kree people, but then she goes on to destroy a whole bunch of alien nuclear warheads, and then destroys part of a fleet of Kree battleships. And based on that, based on the stuff that she's shown to be able to do, it doesn't seem like that there's any threat that the Avengers have faced in the movie so far that she couldn't have single-handedly stopped herself. Right? Like the invasion of New York in the first Avengers movie. It kind of seems like she could have just stopped that one all by herself. The invasion of the Chitauri into Wakanda at the end of Infinity War. Kind of seems like she could have stopped that one all by herself. Like, she embraces her full power, and there's no apparent weaknesses on that power at all. There's no limitations, there's no time limits that she has to observe, there's no energy limits that she has to observe. She just is able to do these really crazy things. And maybe they'll change that for Endgame. Maybe that'll get changed later on in the future, but right now, that whole thing about her being the most powerful is seemingly to be taken seriously, and it's pretty stupid. And I was thinking about the other endings of the Marvel movies, and in every single Marvel movie, the end of the movie, the hero doesn't just beat the bad guy. There's always something else that happens. Either they get help from somebody else, like Captain America does in Winter Soldier, or they have to potentially sacrifice themselves, like Iron Man does or Ant-Man does, or they have to play on the villain's own weaknesses, like Captain America does at the end of the first Captain America movie. And you look at every other movie like that, and there's other things going on. And in Captain Marvel, Carol she just beats the bad guy. She's just that powerful that she's just able to beat everything. And up until the point of the movie, they'd been showing that she does have strict limitations. She does have weaknesses. She's not. There's one point, and you see in the trailer, where she's chasing down a Skrull through the L train. She's more powerful than the Skrull, but she ends up still losing to him because the guy gets away. There's the whole term about the Mary Sue. I wouldn't say that Carol is a Mary Sue, because it does show her not being perfect. It does show that there are characters that have skills that she doesn't have. There are characters that just put her down, and it does show her failing and learning from that failure. So she's not a Mary Sue, but not being a Mary Sue is not a high bar to cross. And I was thinking about the ending, and you think about the ending of like Star Wars, right? Because in the wake of The Force Awakens and stupid Rey from the new Star Wars becoming popular, that's how the term Mary Sue really got popularized. And people are like, well, Luke, he just went from being a farm boy to blowing up the Death Star. So how is that not overpowered? How does that not make him a Mary Sue or whatever? And the thing is, like, if you rewatch the end scene, Luke doesn't just simply blow up the Death Star. And there's actually a cut of the movie where he does just simply blow up the Death Star, and it's really boring and it's really dry, and nobody liked it. And it was actually a woman, whose name I can't remember, but there was this husband and wife team that basically saved Star Wars in editing. And she was like, if you don't have Han Solo at the end, nobody's going to care about the movie. And she was right. So if you rewatch Star Wars Episode 4, you're going to notice that Luke, he doesn't just simply blow up the Death Star. He gets saved by Han, because he's about to, Han saves him from Darth Vader. And then when Luke pulls the trigger on the photon torpedoes, or whatever they were, he's prompted to do so by Obi-Wan, the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan. And not only that, he's also fulfilling the destiny of his absent father, who was, one of the best fighter pilots in the galaxy, and then now Luke is starting to come into that as well. So it's like, even though, yes, Luke does this impossible thing, he's the important part of that is not that he did a thing, right? Because every story is about somebody doing a thing. That's how stories are. The point is that at the end of the story, all of these themes and all of these character interactions and all these plot points have to come together in a way that makes sense. And at the end of Captain Mar-Vell, that's just simply not there. She just simply hits the do it better button, and she's suddenly unstoppably powerful, and she's able to stop an alien fleet all by herself. And you look at, like I said, you look at any other MCU movie, and that doesn't happen. And that exposes a greater weakness with the movie itself, in that even though there are characters that are shown, like I said, Carol is not, for most of the movie, Carol is not overpowered, and there are other characters that are better at certain things, but the more the movie goes on, the more it puts down other characters, essentially. Like, Nick Fury, holy shit. Nick Fury is not Nick Fury in this movie. He's somebody else entirely. And yes, he's younger here, but this movie takes place in 1995, and Iron Man took place in 2008. So it's only 13 years before he meets Tony Stark. So, it's a little bit tough to tell how old characters are in these movies, but he's in his late 40s at least. So, yeah, I mean, yes, he's a younger Nick Fury, and he's definitely not experienced with all this weird sci-fi crap, but the way that Carol keeps constantly, like, putting him down and needling him, and he just acts like a goofball the entire time, and he basically never does anything cool. Outside of a fairly early scene that he's in, once things start to ramp up more and more, he just simply keeps getting saved by other things, whether it's one of the Skrulls or whether it's the freaking cat. And then the whole time Carol is just like making fun of him. And almost all male characters end up getting that treatment in one way or another. Talos the Skrull, he does okay, but other than that, most of the male characters are just useless in this movie. Once again, you look at any other MCU movie, and there was never a need to do that. Like, all of the women in all the MCU movies, for the most part, there's some exceptions here and there, but they went out of their way to show that the women were very capable, and even though the story was centered around a male hero, and in this movie, you have a female hero, and one of the ways that they try to make the female hero look good is to keep bringing down Nick Fury, the character that we know the most. And this is something that we keep constantly seeing in the comics too, that for whatever reason, they feel that the only way to build up female characters is to tear down male characters. And it's just why, you know? So I really didn't like the way that it ended, is the point of that. The point of that entire 15-minute rant. And then the other thing I just really hate about the movie, and this is where the comic fan in me comes in, is just all the missed opportunities. Like, the Skrulls are just way too human. The main Skrull, especially Talos, I mean, he's never been around humans before, but he has an Australian accent, and he just has this very human-like swagger to him. And the way that the Skrulls are in the comics, for one thing, it's basically in the movie, it turns out that the Kree are the bad guys, and the Skrulls are actually the poor victims that the Kree are picking on. And in the comics, it's true that the Kree are not good. And the dichotomy between the Kree and the Skrulls is pretty interesting. But the Skrulls are not victims. The Skrulls are just as imperialistic and warmongering as the Kree are. And they're much more... The difference between the Kree and the Skrull is that the Skrulls are very open about the fact that they are all about conquering. That is their main goal in life, is to expand the Skrull Empire. And their main weapon of doing that is subversion and manipulation and infiltration. But even though their main tactic is to, they're shapeshifters and they lie and they cheat and they steal and they do all these underhanded things, they do have a weird code of honor that they will always be honest about how duplicitous they are. And they even have like a weird respect for anybody that is just as single-minded and or as ruthless as they are. So even though they're bad guys, you can always trust them to be Skrulls. Whereas the Kree pretend that they're just about science and they're about truth and they're about seeking out these higher ideals. But it turns out that they're really not. They're just as power hungry as the Skrulls are, but they're not honest about it. They think that they're above that and they're really not. And so in a way, the Kree are much worse just simply because even though they're not as imperialistic and warmongering as the Skrulls are, they will screw you over just as badly. So here, in this movie, the Skrull are just treated like victims. And that did happen once in the lead up to Secret Invasion. The reason why they wanted to take over Earth was because Galactus had eaten the Skrull homeworld. That was where the main Skrull high command were. So even though the Skrull had a bunch of colonies and there were still a lot of Skrull alive in terms of numbers, they were just scattered to all the reaches of space. There was no central organization. There was no command. They had no clue what to do. So maybe that's what this movie is setting up. That would be pretty cool if that's a stealth way to introduce Galactus, but they never mention why the Skrull are where they are. The whole point of the Skrulls is that they are Middle Eastern Muslims that have been bombed by America, and the Kree are imperialistic America. And sometimes they get accused of reading into things too much, but that's one of those things that seems pretty obvious to me. So it's an anti-war movie in that sense, and it's an anti-American imperialist movie, which normally I would get upset about, but the problem is that I used to be a war hawk, and basically have evolved on that position as time has gone on, especially after having been in the military myself. People talk about the feminist aspect of it as being political, but it's actually the anti-war element and the anti-imperialism element that's actually a much more potent political theme in the movie that they explore a lot more. So it would have been stronger, I think, if the Skrull had been closer to their comic book counterparts, where they are very manipulative and duplicitous, and they are really unlikable because they're just these little green men that are constantly after power, and they're constantly, you know, trying to intimidate people, and just showing them in this really sympathetic light. It actually kind of undermines the theme, because I think it would have been stronger if, you know, we saw that the Skrull were not necessarily sympathetic, but that they were still being mistreated by the Kree, and that the Kree were just going way overboard in how they were going after these guys. So that's just a missed opportunity there. That they have this cool idea of the Skrulls, and they have this idea of the Kree-Skrull War, and you really don't see much of that. I realize it's a 2-hour movie. There's only so much you could do, but that's another missed opportunity. But the biggest missed opportunity is with Mar-Vell himself, or should I say herself, because in this movie, Walter Lawson, aka Mar-Vell, captain of the Kree Empire, is not in the movie. Instead, we have Wendy Lawson, a female Kree officer, has some relationship with Carol, and they don't really go into it that much. Apparently, she was really important to Carol, but we don't really see it that much. It would have been a lot stronger if Carol and Mar-Vell were in a relationship. And so when Mar-Vell gets killed, then that would have been like a really big deal, because I almost wondered if, like, it was originally written that Carol was a lesbian or bisexual, and that's why she was with Mar-Vell, but the hints that we get in the story suggest otherwise. Like, it really doesn't seem like, even though Mar-Vell was apparently this really important person to her, which, by the way, my understanding of Kree naming conventions is that male Kree had 2-syllable names, like Mar-Vell, Yon-Rog, Ronan, etc., and that female Kree had 3-syllable names, like Minerva. But in this movie, Mar-Vell is just a female name, and that annoyed me. But yeah, I mean, so Mar-Vell, it's very difficult to know this now, especially if you're only familiar with modern comics, but for about 20 years, Mar-Vell, in universe anyway, maybe not by the readership, but in universe, Mar-Vell was considered the greatest hero in the Marvel Universe. I'm not sure how well he ever really caught on with the readers, but Mar-Vell, I mean, a lot of the Marvel Universe that we have is due to the work that was done within the pages of the Mar-Vell comic. Like Thanos. Thanos' first big thing that he did was stealing the Cosmic Cube, and that happened in the pages of Captain Marvel. So here you have this character that was a really important part of Marvel continuity for a long time, still is to this day, although they're trying their best to downplay him. And he's the reason that Carol got her powers and everything, and they are totally erasing him from the canon to the point that he doesn't, the real Captain Marvel doesn't make an appearance. Instead, there's a female character that they're saying is him, but didn't accomplish any of the things that he did. Right? I mean, they're basically saying that the most important thing that Mar-Vell ever did was to give Carol her powers, but I can think of a fair number of classic Captain Marvel stories. Number of classic Carol Danvers stories is pretty slim. And then there's some other stuff, and this was the stuff I was seeing on Twitter before I saw the movie, so I kind of knew about it going in, but like, we find out how Nick Fury lost his eye, and the reason is because Goose the cat scratches it out. Like, in Winter Soldier, there was this big important scene where Nick Fury alluded to a point in the past where he had trusted somebody and then lost an eye to them. And then it turned out that that big, important, dramatic backstory element that was only hinted at but seemed really cool, turns out, no, a cat scratched him. And it turns out there's more to Goose the cat than is immediately apparent. And then the other element is that the name, the Avengers Initiative, that Fury talks about to Iron Man, turns out that also comes from Carol, because that was her call sign when she was a pilot. Even though in the comics the call sign was Warbird, which has actually got that name. And there's also the mid-credit scene is presumably a scene from Avengers Endgame itself, and it has Carol appearing with the rest of the Avengers. It's not that Brie Larson is a bad actress. She isn't, and she's not terrible in this movie, but it's still very hard to take her seriously as a superhero, quite frankly. And like in the trailers, one of the things she was made fun of a lot was for only having one facial expression. The same dour, serious, stone-faced, plank of wood expression. In the movie, though, it's actually not that. It's kind of the opposite. She actually ends up spending a lot of the movie smirking, which, I mean, Iron Man does too, but like, Iron Man is supposed to be kind of a jerk. He's supposed to be kind of an asshole. So it's like, yeah, he's a jerk, but he's kind of a likable jerk, but he is still a jerk, whereas Carol, you're just supposed to like her implicitly, but she does a lot of pretty off-putting things. And when she appears with the rest of the Avengers in this mid-credit scene, it's, I don't know, there just seems to be a big difference in weight and gravitas between her and between the other characters on screen. So, I mean, this movie is probably going to do financially well. Supposedly, its Thursday box office take was north of $20 million domestically, which is really good for a Thursday. And the theater that I went to today, I went at the earliest matinee I could on a school day, although I guess some schools were out. But there was a fair number of people here, and this is a small town that I'm living in right now. It won't be soon, but I'm living in the small town, and I very rarely see the theater with as many people as were in it as today. So for a movie that's supposed to be this, left-wing feminist liberal propaganda, but I'm in a pretty red part of the country. So I imagine that the movie's going to do financially well, but the big problem that I keep saying was that there was the potential that if people don't like the character, if they don't like the movie, if they don't like the direction that the movies in general are going in, it's going to put a big dent in future movies after Endgame, because people are going to see that regardless. And I think that is a very, very valid concern that Disney ought to have. So I see that this review has gone on a while, which surprises me. And not only that, I could think of more to say about it, to be honest. Because it's weird that the movie is simultaneously so bland, and yet there's so much to kind of like chew on. I don't know, maybe it's just because they've just hyped this movie up so much that I feel like I have to say more about it. But I think I'm going to stop it here. So tell me what you think. Tell me how you felt about it. Agree, disagree. Like, comment, subscribe. In any case, this is Unranked Chevron signing off.